Your Next Big Move podcast for anyone involved in the buying and selling of businesses that wants to know how to do it right. Hosted by Zoran and brought to you by Exclusive Business Sales. Sell your business with certainty.
Hello everyone. Today my guest is Joanna Oakey. Joanna is commercial lawyer and principal of Aspect Legal, law firm that specializes in commercial law and mergers and acquisitions. Joanna is also host of the Deal Room podcast and author of recently published book, Buy, Grow, Exit. Legal advice is a crucial component of buying and selling businesses, and legal negotiations can make or break the deal. That's why in this conversation, Joanna shares with me her extensive knowledge that will help you understand the legal part of the deal making. She shares some fantastic tips and insights that will help you increase likelihood of achieving successful deal regardless if you're a buyer or a seller of the business. So let's get into it. Hello, Joanna. How are you?
Zoran, hello. I am fabulous. How are you today?
Fabulous, as always.
Always.
Hey, I want to talk to you today about lawyers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry,
I've just discovered this.
No, they're my favorite people in any deal. All right?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course.
And you got your new book out, Buy, Grow, and Exit.
Buy, Grow, Exit. That's right. Found it buygrowexit.com.au.
Well, look, I have to be honest, I haven't finished it. I'm about 3/4 through it.
I'm disappointed in you, Zoran. That's okay.
It's a time factor. It's quite actually interesting. And I want to start with one quote from your book.
Go for it.
You say this, so it's chapter 5 or whatever, like it's a book, but it really, really leads into what we're going to talk about today. One of the most important steps in evaluating business you are looking to acquire is understanding what is it that forms the core value you are seeking out of the acquisition and ensuring that this value will be transferred. This seems obvious, but so often buyers, and then you put here in the brackets, and they lawyers, so you know it, become so caught up in detail of the transaction that they miss the wood from the trees. It's really well put together, but why did you decide to say this?
You know, the reality is, I mean, I've seen so many deals. I've been in hundreds, maybe thousands of deals. So I've seen it all. I've seen what works. I've seen what doesn't work. But I've also seen how lawyers, and it comes from the issue for lawyers, comes from the way we're trained. We're trained to pick up detail. That's what we spend years in university reading through a lot of stuff, and then we spend years reading through contract after contract, and a lot of that training is about seeing detail. So what lawyers so often miss because of their training is the ability to understand the detail, but to be able to step back and see the bigger picture. And I just think it's not just an issue in business sale and acquisition transactions. It's an issue across the board, I think, for lawyers in the way that we train. But it particularly comes out in this area, because in this area, in business sale and acquisitions, in reality, we're all about trying to get a deal done, right? And this is, the reality is, you guys as brokers, us as lawyers, what we should be unified by is making sure good deals get done well.
Yeah, you got to be on the side of the deal.
You got to be on the side of the deal, but that's I mean, it seems obvious, and I really like, one of the things that I've always enjoyed is understanding complexity but bringing it always back to simplicity. And the reality is, it's very, in so many instances, the detail of a transaction will take over, and not just the lawyers, also the buyers and the sellers themselves start getting caught up in the detail rather than the bigger picture of where they're going.
So the good lawyer, or, good broker or anybody good advisor should pull them back onto what's actually
Yeah.
important and take them away from the detail.
100%. And part of that comes from, it's something that I talk about in the book, it's the emotion of the seller, the emotion of the buyer. And that's often what can get sellers really caught in the detail, because they've got this thing going on, which quite often is the only time that they've done this transaction in their life.
Yeah.
And wherever they are unsure in areas that, you know, quite often they're very accomplished business people, they're used to being in control, they're used to understanding how it is that they do what they do every day. When they're in a business sale context, they're in a completely different environment, which can make it very difficult because they want to control the environment. They get nervous about what they don't understand. And it is the role of advisors, of brokers and of lawyers who are in the transaction to help keep pulling the clients back, being aware of the detail because that is important, but always keeping in mind that 100-foot perspective.
And look, often, so look, we're talking lawyers today, all right? What I want to get to the bottom of it today is how do you figure out who's the good lawyer to actually help you in acquisition or sale of the business? And how do you figure out who you should not deal with, because not all lawyers are the same. And some are more experienced in this field than the others. What I've found that inexperienced lawyer will try, well, they're not going to try, but because they're not going right way about the process, they're making a deal more and more difficult, and often they actually can destroy the deal because they don't keep that, what you call, big picture or helicopter view and looking at most important things. And detail is important, but if you give too much attention to the detail, it becomes a problem. It's not helping anymore through the process, but it's actually working against you. So having said that, what makes a good M&A lawyer?
Yeah. So a good M&A lawyer is a lawyer who has the ability to negotiate well, number one.
Yeah.
And I think that's, it's often overlooked, the importance of psychology in this area. You have to be someone who can work out what needs to happen, then find the way to make it happen. And one of these things, we were talking about the issues with lawyers before and coming back to how do you choose a lawyer. I think it's really important that you understand how, number one, the experience that a lawyer has in business sale and acquisitions, because the one thing that so many buyers and sellers don't understand is that most lawyers don't deal with business sales and acquisitions on a day-to-day basis. That's the reality. Because if you think about it, each business owner is on average only selling a business once or two in their entire lifetime.
Yeah.
And a buyer is only, quite often, unless they're a multiple buyer, which, and I think there's so much opportunity for SMEs in growing through acquisition, but unless they're doing that, a buyer's probably only bought once or twice in their lifetime as well. And so their lawyer that's supporting them along the way has only supported them in the entire time that they've been a client, once or twice in a business sale or acquisition.
Okay.
So the reality is most lawyers don't deal with this on a regular day-to-day basis. And there's so much complexity in business sale and acquisition. If you're not dealing with it regularly, you're not going to have the checklists and the templates and know how to deal with each of the different permutations of issues that can come up.
So a couple of things on that. So how do I, as a seller or buyer, know if my lawyer is experienced or not?
You ask them, how many business sale or acquisitions are you running right now? Ask them that.
Okay.
Because and in fact, I have a list of about 15 or 16 questions that you can ask a lawyer. It's called Choosing a Lawyer Checklist. And it's a checklist of here's all the questions that go take this to any lawyer and ask them to give you the answer for all of this. So how many transactions are you running right now? How many transactions have you run in the last year?
Yeah.
Things like what are your systems and processes? How do you keep a deal moving? What do you do to keep a deal moving?
That's a good question.
Yeah, absolutely. What templates do you have? What checklists do you have internally? Those sorts of things. So that's, as I say, I've got about 15, maybe more questions.
And you said it's more psychological. Well, it's a lot psychology involved in that, and the lawyer needs to know how to negotiate. To what degree a lawyer needs to negotiate the deal?
It's not negotiate the deal.
Yeah,
It's
you see where I'm going from. Yeah.
That is 100%. I'm glad you asked that, because that may be a confusion with what I said. No, it's not negotiate the deal at all. And I think that's a common mistake perhaps that some lawyers make, thinking that their job is to come in and think about whether the right deal has been done and negotiate the deal. And that's often
they got too far into that commercial part
Yeah.
of the deal and think that their job is to advise client on the commercial points of the deal. That's already been negotiated for 6 months between
Absolutely.
the buyer and the seller.
That's right.
So what we're talking here, if I understand you right, is negotiating particular detail of the contract to
Exactly.
document what's already agreed.
100%, that's
Yeah.
right. And look, the smallest thing can come up sometimes from, we've talked about lawyers can get focused on the detail. If you're dealing with a lawyer who's focused on the detail, you need how to work out how to get through that lawyer. And that's what I mean from
So
a
how do you do
psychology-
that? Well, that's a,
Yeah.
that's $1 billion question.
Yeah, that's a big question.
So how do you do that? How do you deal with the lawyer on the other side? You particularly, how would you deal with the lawyer on the other side that really gives too much attention to the detail?
Yeah. So I always, my default and go-to in that situation is always try and get the parties together in, I call it an all-parties meeting. And what an all-parties meeting means, just stepping back for a moment, picking up the phone is the very first thing. So I like to pick up the phone, and this is what I always say to my team, if something's going awry, stop with the emails. Pick up the phone, have a conversation with the lawyer on the other side. But would you believe it? Some lawyers refused to allow a telephone conversation.
So I know we started talking, but why do you think the conversation over the phone or in person is much better than email?
I mean, number one, it's a lot quicker, so it's a lot more efficient for legal fees for our clients.
Yep.
We should be doing what we can to keep it as efficient as possible. Phone call is shorter than an email that's going to respond to another email, and you're going to have to email back. You can get it all dealt with in one call. But the other thing that you can do is you can hear the perspective. And so what it's all about is, it's not what someone says, it's what's behind what they're saying. Like, what is the real reason?
You can feel what they're trying to say.
100%. And that's the biggest thing. And actually, I had this, I'll just talk about a transaction that I was on just yesterday. So this is a classic example of why this works so well, because it was just in heads of agreement stage. There really shouldn't be a hell of a lot of negotiation in this stage once the commercial terms have been agreed. But, we got heads of agreement marked up, come back with a lot of detail. And at that point, what could happen is that the parties could start to distrust each other at that point. And you really got to get in quickly, because a lot of what keeps a deal driving is not allowing distrust to get in there between the parties artificially. So anyway, so I said, look, let's stop. I'm just going to call the lawyer on the other side and just understand what's going on here. So I called the lawyer on the other side, and it became really clear why it hadn't been the lawyer, it had been the client on the other side. They'd been concerned because a deal had fallen through in the past, and they wanted more detail, and there was this fear that they had. So I was like, okay, well, if that's what we're dealing with, number one, it makes sense. And number two, I can explain it to my client, but number three, we can come up with ways that we can get through this quickly. But, if we had have just reacted to that with going and sending a whole heap of markup back, would have, it just would have ended up in forwards and backwards.
Disagree.
Right.
Why do you guys do that? Why do you guys do that? And you can't soften it up. It just sounds rude and obnoxious.
Yeah.
And it's just my way or the highway.
Absolutely.
And that's where the distrust starts building up, and it's really hard to revive the deal after that.
But the other way to cut through that, so as I said, one of the things is calling the lawyer on the other side, which is great if you can get the lawyer on the other side to speak to you. I think sometimes people don't like to speak to us.
Why?
Well, because they don't really know why they've got the position that they've got. I honestly believe that. I do. They don't know. They're just like, they're sitting there with the detail. This is how they usually write it. They want to write it this way. They haven't thought through the commerciality, and they don't want to get on the phone because they can't justify it. They don't know how to justify it. That's the reason they won't get on the phone.
I can't tell you how many times I've seen that.
I do.
And
it is 100% true, isn't it?
And it never gets easier to absorb. Like just getting to the room. And I have had lawyers refuse to actually say, no, that's not how we do it. Keep on writing letters. They refuse to send in a room. And the deal drags for a month, or not even deal now. We're documenting a deal, which could have been done in one day with 1 2-hour meeting with all parties involved.
Well, and this is the thing, and this is the such an important role that the broker plays. And I think a thing that many lawyers misunderstand in terms of the real opportunity that they have to forge a good relationship with brokers on the deal, right, is because the broker, you can talk to the buyer and the seller. Us as the lawyers, we can only talk to our clients directly, and the solicitor on the other side, we can't talk to their client. And, you know, when we have this great relationship going between the lawyer and the broker, you can say to the broker, look, I can't, there's these issues that are coming back from the lawyer. We need the parties to get together in an all-parties meeting. And I think this is where, when you've got a problem with a lawyer, you've got to get all the parties, so the two lawyers and the clients together in one call. And the reason for that is if you know, assuming you're dealing with lawyers who are confident of their position and understand how to argue it, it's probably not a good idea if you've got lawyers who aren't any confident or any good at arguing it, because that could end up really badly.
Look,
but
I don't think that arguing is the best word you've chosen there, but look, you got to have a discussion.
Negotiating. Yeah, that's right. So, putting their point forward. But in that instance, the reason why that works so well is if the broker can convince, you know, let's say we're acting for the seller and we haven't been able to get through to through the solicitor to the buyer, we can go to the broker and say, okay, what really needs to happen to save this deal is we need to get all of the parties in the same room. The lawyer doesn't want it. You need to go and find a way that we can get everyone together. And once we get everyone together, we've got the opportunity then to talk about the reality of what all of this legal wrangling actually means. Like, this is what the legal issues mean. Is this what you mean from a commercial perspective? And quite often, you know, let's say we're talking about the buyer on the other side, the buyer will sit there and say, oh, is that what it actually means?
Yeah,
no,
they misunderstand.
I will agree to it.
Yeah, why? There's no problem.
Why is there a problem?
Yeah.
And if the lawyer sees there's a problem, then they have the opportunity to discuss that at that point. So that's the way through, I think.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you another question about this. I know you got a bit of a team, quite a bit of a team behind you or with you. I don't know how you refer to that.
Team is great, perfect,
team.
with us, alongside.
And you're obviously commercial, and I have seen that in the past when the practices grow, then it gets much harder to bring that to keep that commerciality through the team, and so that type of service keeps on getting delivered. And I know in your case does. So what do you do to make sure that all people that work with you, lawyers and paralegals and all the team, actually understands what we're talking about and continues? And look, it's not as simple as you employ somebody and you tell them what to do. It doesn't work 100%. Like that. Well, he worked in 1800s, but not now. So how do you do it? What's your secret?
And it is a huge challenge, you know, and that is, it's a thing that I think about and have thought about in the past so often. How is it that you maintain the way that you provide these services, particularly when they're a bit different to the norm as you scale? And that is a hard thing for any business owner. Certainly in law, it is particularly hard as well. The way I do it is there's sort of three approaches. Number one is training.
Yep.
So that's ensuring that you have constant feedback to talk about the way that you do things and why you do things and how to do things. Yep. So that's the first thing. The second thing is systems and procedures. So clarity around what people must do. So we have we have service promises, so we must get back to clients within 24 hours, or anyone within 24 hours. So quick replies, dealing with things in a certain way, getting on the phone if issues appear, all of those sorts of things that are our service qualities, so that they need to be baked into processes and systems and expectations. And then the third thing is, hopefully we're going to be able to edit this out because I can't even remember what the third thing is. Hold on, the third thing. Anyway, whatever. No, hold on. I'm going to get there.
Okay.
I'm going to get there. I'm going to get there. Choice of person. No, God, I can't even remember. Third thing is really making sure that you've got the right team members in place. And one of the things that we do that is very different, I think, in the market, and that I think is super important, is end of week and end of month reviews. So that actually, I think, of all the things that I just talked about.
End of week and the end of month reviews in terms of the deals that you're working on.
So we talk.
matters.
So I talk about it as like the M&A deal team review process. And so we come in and we say, okay, what deals do we have on this month? What went really well? Where did issues come? What can we do with those sorts of issues,
and use that as an opportunity to
build a
train
process
and learn,
to
and
train, learn, and
improve
build
the
new
process.
processes if need be. So it's like these constant improvement, but constant source of learning.
Do you find that it's easier to make a new systems with the people that are less experienced and fresh into the field?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
There's the answer. There's not.
All right, thank you. I was going to say maybe experience counts for something, but obviously not. But,
do you know, it's super hard to break that, and for people to
bad
understand.
habits to beat out of them.
100%.
So, but when it comes to negotiation, and we talked about it earlier, negotiating the deal and negotiating the best way to do it. When you got somebody who doesn't have experience, how do they negotiate? How do you overcome that?
Yeah. Well, one of those things is back to training, right? So what I try to do is allow whoever the team member is on a particular deal to stay at the front of it, but then they'll always be consulting me or whoever they're dealing with as an sort of more in an advisory capacity behind the scenes. So there's a lot in our firm that goes on with what you see on the front, and then the coaching that people are receiving behind the scenes, which is not necessarily the most efficient way to run any deal. And of course, we don't charge our clients for that coaching behind it, but it's our cost. But that is our cost in training and making sure
that the quality of service delivery stays.
That's right.
Look. It's not the best way to say it, but I'll say it, all right? How do you control your lawyer? All right? So, and look, often, and I remember in my early days when I was starting a business, you didn't know what you can say to the lawyer, what to do and what not to do. And they, looking back on some of the deals, not just purchasing of the businesses, but some of the commercial deals that I've done in the past, I should have controlled the process better, but I didn't know to what degree I should instruct my lawyer and to what degree I should listen to my lawyer.
Yeah.
And in some instances, I'm not using those lawyers anymore, but in some instances, honestly, they were trying to do certain things because it was beneficial for them, because they could have charged more. All right, it could have been done easier, and in some instances, the advice that I got, I shouldn't really listen. I should go to my gut feeling. In some instances, advice was really good and I listened and helped. So how does the one know how to deal with lawyer? Doesn't matter, but let's talk about business sales and acquisitions. To what degree can I instruct my lawyer what to do? To what degree I should listen to my lawyer? What's your view on all of that?
I think you should always feel that you're in the position of understanding what's happening. And I think one of the real problem points is when lawyers set themselves up as though they are better than or know better than their clients. And if you feel that you're in that situation, to be honest, I really think you're just with the wrong lawyer. But the very first thing, and you can pull out mid-transaction with a lawyer that you're working with a move. So it's something that everyone should know. If you're dealing and if you end up in a situation where you feel out of control, you don't understand the things that are happening and why, and you don't feel you have any control over timing and all of those sorts of things, bring it up with your lawyer. There's nothing that you can't say to your lawyer. And and I sometimes have very robust discussions with my clients, but if they have questions, I'll always, and we at Aspect Legal will always help them understand why, and what we're doing, and that deals with everything, because you of course it's not your area of specialisation. That's why you go to a lawyer. That's the whole point of it. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't understand what's happening and why. And if a lawyer, if you are leaving the process without understanding, then that is the lawyer's fault.
Okay, so if you're walking away from the meeting and thinking, hang on, I'm more confused now than when I walked in.
I don't know what happened.
You should ask for clarification.
You should absolutely.
And if you can't get it, change the lawyer.
Yeah, that's not your fault. That's not something, you should be taken through the process in a way that you understand it.
Okay. That's a good advice. Look, what you just said. Never thought of that. Like, if you don't like a lawyer, change the lawyer.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Move on. But
why? Yeah, why not?
But I'll tell you why it got me by surprise, because you're thinking, I already invested all this time and effort and everything, and you're thinking, oh, this may going to improve and everything else. Well, no, it won't. If it was halfway like that, expect the second half to be the same. So maybe sometimes it's good, just change the lawyer.
Yeah.
Change the lawyer.
An example of that whole situation, we had a client that came to us and had spent, so in this particular deal, it had taken about 12 months for the deal to be put together. And then they went to their lawyer at a time, who was a general practice lawyer, and unfortunately also did a bit of litigation, which meant they liked fighting.
Yeah.
And this deal sat with this lawyer for, I think, like about 4 or 5 months, in forwards and backwards between the two lawyers on the other side, who were just, who and they'd taken.
So what was, like, if you can give us a detail, what was the problem? What was there to go forward and backwards for 5 months after the deal has already been agreed for?
Yeah.
What are we doing?
Yeah. So number one, I think it was taking 3 weeks for each lawyer to turn around a draft each time. So that adds a lot of time, right? And instead of them talking to each other, they'd do a draft and then send it back 3 weeks. It'd sit, get redone, then a draft would come back. So that was what was happening. But it was like nitpicking through the whole document. And there are some issues with warranties and some concern around warranties, which is a traditional area that can come up in bigger deals, not so much in the smaller deals, but in larger deals, that can be an issue. But they were just nitpicking. So anyway, it got to this point where, and the buyer and seller, there was an earn-out, so there needed to be trust, in the relationship post-sale as well. And the buyer and seller had started like with this really strong relationship together. And by the end of this period of time with the two lawyers, there was this real distrust, but they both wanted to get the deal done. And so they sort of threw up their hands and said, well, what can we do? And they came to me at that point, one of the parties, so the seller came to me, and I said, okay, I think we can salvage this. Just give me one meeting with everyone together, and let's just sit down and see if we can nut through it. So I went through the contract. 75% of what they were arguing about were complete red herrings and absolutely had no impact for either of them at the end of the day. 25% were real issues. So got them all in a room together. I said, right, let's work through this list. Really? Are you really arguing about this? This is what it means. No, I don't care. Do you care? No, I don't care. Right. What about this one? This is what it means. Is that really what you're arguing about? Yeah. We got through to the last, and then it looked achievable. So we just came up with, because we weren't dealing with as many issues by then,
So communication is important.
Communication.
Just communicate. It's not a...
Yeah. And so they move from, I can't even remember, they said they'd been 4 or 5 months, whatever it was, with these other lawyers. And I think I think the buyer appointed a new lawyer at the same time as well. So two people who are fresh, but but we got the deal done in 1 week. 1 week.
So why do you think there was a problem? All right, was it that the lawyers were not confident enough? Were lawyers managing their own risk, or they just didn't have a competence in doing it, or they were trying to make more money, or they just... What do you think happened?
I don't think it's the more money thing. Having said that, I think the seller paid more than 50 grand in legal fees, and then they got it tied up in, I can't even remember, like four grand in legal fees to actually get it done at the end of the day, because really it only took one meeting, and then, we finalised.
So if it wasn't money, what was it?
I don't think it was money. I don't know, like people say this all the time, that lawyers do it because of money. I don't think they do.
I didn't say that. I just asked, is there one of them with money? But
I don't
why?
think so.
But why? You want to do the deal. Okay, if it's not the money, and I believe it's not the money, all right? Money is just a good byproduct of you not knowing what you're doing, all right? So because you're not competent, you make more money. How good is that, all right? But
it's true. There was no downside for them.
Correct. But why? If that wasn't the case, why? Was it a fee? And I have seen this when the lawyers just bit out of their depth and they're just scared to put that final approval on it. And it's never good enough. And it's not because of the client protection, but it's for their own protection. Is there what's your vision?
100%. I think that's absolutely the answer, Zoran. Absolutely. I think there were things in the contract that could look scary if you didn't understand the fact that they're actually really standard. So if you're not used to the market, if you're not used to the industry, if you're not used to what sits in warranties normally,
because you live in the courtroom and you just see people suing each other over this, and you don't want to be the one that gets blamed for it.
Absolutely.
And I honestly think that's the case. Look, how much do you spend talking to your clients about the real risk because there is a level of the risk that you have to accept when you buy the business. You're not going to make a risk-free transaction. If it's a risk-free transaction, the return would be 2%, but it's not. All right, it's much higher than that. So you're building into your yield, you're building a risk that you're taking. You actually talk to them about it sometimes, all the time, and say, listen, all right, you're getting into the business. We can't make this 100%. You have to make some decisions, and you have to take a certain level of risk.
Absolutely. Of course, absolutely. And, it depends, that level of discussion depends on whether you're working with a buyer or a seller, because the risk element in the deal is different for either of them. And it depends on the value of the transaction, obviously, and how, because risk can be two things. Risk can relate to a failure in transfer of value, so risk that you don't get the value that you want out of the deal, or risk can be that something blows up that you're not expecting along the way, right? So there's sort of two components of risk. And in due diligence, so for example, if we're acting for a buyer, and I literally had this conversation just 2 days ago with a buyer. If you have to be careful about how detailed you want to get in everything, because you could ask the seller for every contract, every document they've got in their business, right? You could. But are you really going to be able to assess that? Are you really going to be able to work out what the risk is? Or are you going to end up in a position where you can't see the wood for the trees yourself? What you really need to do is step back and think about...
And if you're going to find a problem, if you want to find a problem, you will find a problem.
Of course you find a problem. Of course.
It's a business. Nothing is 100%.
That's right.
It doesn't run smoothly.
There
are issues. And there may going to be some issues. If you're looking for risk-free transaction, it's not going to happen. Because even if the business today is 100% sweet and clean and there's no problems, 2 weeks down the track, something's going to happen in Europe that's going to infect the prices of, I don't know, second-hand cars. It's going to affect you. That's how it works.
That's exactly right. And that's one of the issues with if you're dealing with a buyer who hasn't bought a business before, isn't sophisticated in business or the industry that they're buying into as well. And then they go to a lawyer who really loves to get into lots of DD. You've got a recipe for disaster, because what will happen is a buyer who's really keen on the business can get in and have this whole emotion of being overwhelmed because concerned that they need to understand every nook and cranny of risk that is sitting there. Then you've got lawyers who think it's their job to, to investigate every nook and cranny. And certainly there's a certain level of understanding that you need to have in a business if you're buying it, and there's different levels you need to understand. But share sale and business sale.
But is your position as a lawyer there to advise people? Say you're representing me. It's not your position to tell me if I can run this business or not. Your position is there to look at it legally. What we agreed is documented.
Well, yeah, but if you're looking at due diligence, then it's a little bit different. It's about what you can do, and I'm talking about a legal perspective. Obviously, there's lots of different elements of due diligence, but from a legal perspective, you're testing from a legal perspective whether the value that the seller says is there to the extent that you can test that from a legal perspective, and whether there's any potential impediments in that transferring, and the risks. What are the risks that are likely to transfer to a buy from a legal perspective?
From legal perspective,
yeah, that's right. So that's the DD side for a lawyer, and then obviously
that's a problem to a lot of advisors, because clients come to you with the wrong question.
Mm.
I'm not here to answer if you want to buy this business or not. That's up to you to decide if it's a commercially good investment for you. For me, is to actually make sure that legally everything is documented and do legal due diligence to see if there's any risk from legal point of view.
That's right.
And look, we had through valuations and stuff, often the people come to us and goes, do you think this is good business? Well, I don't know what your circumstances are. I don't know what you know, what you don't know. I don't know what friends and family you got, what experience in life you got. I can tell you what I think this business is worth on the open market. And that's as far as my advice is going to go. Yeah. You make a decision if you can run it as successfully or better than the person before you.
Yeah.
You mentioned this is always big, to use the word you use, point of arguing between both parties. You talked about earnouts and clawbacks and deferred payments. And a lot of deals do have them. I'm not sure if we're seeing more or less or the same, but they're there. They're always there, and they're always going to be there. There are few reasons why people would have deferred payments. One, I need the finance because I can't raise the finance. So you're going to, as a seller, finance me portion of the purchase price. The other one is to offset certain risks, such as loss of the client or to hit a certain, look, you're going to train me for 12 months, and at the end of 12 months, I'm going to release the last 100,000 just to make sure that you stay with me for this. And then there's an upside, which I'm going to say, well, you think, well, not me, but, buyer's going to say, look, you think that the business is going to improve? Well, let's do something about it. I'll pay what I think the business is worth today. And sometime down the track, if the business improves, I'm going to pay more. Now, what happens often when the seller goes to their lawyer, the lawyer says, oh, don't do that, it's very risky. And I have had deals that seller listened to the lawyer who scared them, into accepting that deal. And then next deal that was accepted, it was much lower. Mm. So what? You missed money that you may gonna get for the deal that you definitely not gonna get that money because there was no earnout. And but I understand that point. Like you need to look at the person on the other side, and are they creditworthy, and then do they have a history? But in those earnouts and deferred payments, they do become an issue. And especially when it comes in front of the lawyer. Now, how do you deal with that? How do you deal when somebody comes to you and says, listen, there's a $5 million deal and they want to pay me 2.5 now and 2.5 million in 3 years' time?
Well, so I'm glad you posed an actual example, because it can depend on what the cut up is for what you get now and what's at risk. And then the second part of the question is, how at risk is it? Is it at risk because the amount might change on the basis of the performance of the business, or is it just at risk because it's a set deferred payment, and we have to work out, when that's going to be paid? So the very first thing is making sellers understand earnouts, deferred payments, clawbacks, vendor finance, however we're describing it, is such a normal part of deals. And if you're refusing to even accept in any way that as an option, that's fine. You're just going to cut out a stack of buyers, and you're probably going to reduce your sale price because you have less competitive tension, and because you're forcing all of the risk on the buyer. Because the reason for other than a financing reason for deferred payments, the reason for earnouts or contingent payments, so payments that might change based on the performance of the business or the amount of time the seller sticks around for or whatever, are generally based on the buyer ensuring that they have protected the value transferring in the business. That's ultimately what the reason for a lot of this deal structuring is for. Now, to put that as an example, say, for example, you're buying a business where the seller has a lot of relationships in the business that become important in the buyer's mind, whether it's true or not, to them being able to make sure they keep up the revenue and the profit that was sitting in the business prior to sale. They're going to want the seller to stay on for a period of time. And one of the ways that they can ensure that that happens is by having a deferred payment, a contingent payment, something that's based on the future operation of the business. So the question is not, is that a good approach or a deal? It's how certain are you to how much of that value is protected for you as a seller.
And how can you de-risk it
and
for
how
the buyer?
can you de-risk it for the buyer?
Yeah,
and understand it from a buyer's position, which is I'm paying for the value. I want to ensure I get that value.
That's a really good point. Put yourself in the buyer's, if you're a seller, put yourself in the buyer's shoes and say, well, what would I think if I'm looking on this business from outside in? And vice versa, as a seller, as a buyer, think how the seller's thinking. And,
100%.
He doesn't know me and I'm asking for $2 million. Hey, credit. I mean, go to the bank and see how that works for you.
Well, actually, in the book, Buy, Grow, Exit.
Oh, here we go. Shameless plug. Go on.
I have both the buy and the exit section, but in it, I sort of talk about the importance for the buyers to read the exit section and understand the thought processes that are going on for a seller, and for sellers to read the buy section, understand the thought processes for a buyer, understand
Absolutely.
Deal structure, why buyers want to structure things in certain ways and why sellers want to structure things in certain ways.
So from the seller's point of view, so I accept some sort, let's say I'm a seller and I accept some sort of deferred payment in some form of the other. How do you secure that payment? What are the securities?
Yeah. So there's lots of ways that you can approach security. There's some regular, and then there's lots of creative ways that you can come up with along the way. But the most regular is taking a security over the business, so a PPSR security. So we take an ALPAP, which is a general security agreement, over the business. So that's a, sort of a standard one. Personal guarantees, directors' guarantees, parent company guarantees. They're all sort of fairly standard things for you to consider as well. Retained sums, so retentions or holdbacks, funds that are held back is in and put in trust for a period of time are another fairly common approach. But if you think if there's an earnout in play and it's a large component, from a seller perspective, don't think you're going to get that all in trust, because the reality is the buyer needs funds to run the business.
That's the reason why he's asking for it.
Be careful with that.
What are the creative ones?
Oh, look, there's so many different creative ones that we've done. personal guarantees. We can sometimes add caveats over caveats over real property. That's something that we'll pull out sometimes. There's. I don't know. I can't.
I'll tell you one that I've seen, and I thought it was very creative. It came from the seller. So the seller accepted a portion of the payment to be deferred, but he said, okay, we're entering into non-compete agreement. If you default on this, the clause doesn't apply, which means I can go and chase the clients again.
Love it.
And he put a lot of pressure on the buyer, and he put him on the spot and said, yeah, all right, that's fair enough. I can see I don't want to lose these clients because I paid a good a month at the beginning. I don't want to, just for the sake of saving a few 100,000, which you can't. Like, I mean, the agreement is agreement. But he worked a treat, and he was better than the personal guarantees for both buyer and the seller. So you can really get creative. And on the end of the day, you need to come up with a mechanism that both parties are happy and confident that it's going to do the trick and secure the payment.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. And unless we're talking about deferred payments for financing reasons, I think with these, with earnouts, for example, one of the things that can really help is if a seller has confidence that the amount that they're making out of the first payment plus the risk and opportunity that comes out of future earnouts is worth more than if they were just going to put the business on the market and get, cash up front. Does that,
correct,
I mean, that's the reality, isn't it? And that's what buyers have to understand as well, because quite often earnouts, buyers come in and just think of it as a one-way street. But, sometimes from a seller's perspective, it should go either way.
If I can get the same price, same value from somebody else without earnouts, I'm going to go with that deal. So if I'm doing any earnouts or any vendor finance or any deferred payments, it has to be better than what I can get as a cash deal elsewhere.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. And but one of the things might be, and you talked about this as an example before, the seller went to their lawyer said, "Oh my God, earnouts, no, who does that? Don't do that." Walk away. They walked away.
I heard them say that's never done. What do you mean never done?
Well, that's a clear. That should be. Maybe we can add that to the lawyer checklist. Ask your lawyer if earnouts are ever done.
There you go. If it says it's never done, run.
But the point was, I think this is part of the emotion of sellers, because they can be easily tricked into believing there might be a better deal around the corner for them, and that is the thing. Because when they're parting with this asset that they've built for all of their life, they can become a little bit hesitant or scared right at the end, whether the deal's the best deal,
40 years of your life, it's a lot of years.
Yeah.
What's your process? Like, we talked a lot about you got to focus on most important thing and most important value parts of the business that you want to transfer it. So how do you identify the best and most important parts of business that we need to focus on when we're doing a legal contract for sale of the business? And how do you identify what's not so important and you should just not give it as much attention?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
And what are they? What are the most important parts?
Well, it depends. It depends on each business, but there are some fairly common, main ones that many businesses will come back to. And that is some clients. So client base is, quite often a very valuable component of the business that a buyer wants to see the value in transfer. So they want to see the client stay and the clients continue to buy at least what they're buying now. And obviously they prefer them to buy more. so that's the first thing. Staff is another big one, and particularly so in today's environment where we see labour being one of those real pain points for businesses, right at the moment in Australia, in Australian businesses. So staffing and ensuring that staffing will stay in the knowledge of staff can be a critical thing. And then others, like sometimes it's intellectual property, sometimes it's business location and, ensuring longevity of lease. And there can be all sorts of, sometimes it's supply relationships or distributor relationships. It depends on business to business.
And what are not important ones?
Well,
everything else.
Yeah.
No, I know it's a hard question, but something came to my mind. Like, I have seen stuff like this, and we had an argument for like 2 weeks. If something needs to be served to the other party, how's it going to be served?
Yeah, right. Yeah,
who cares?
Yeah.
Just let them know. You're losing 2 weeks over the deal, and 2 weeks in selling a business process, it could be a long time. A lot of things can happen. So when you got a deal, you got to drive it very, very quickly and keep people keep their attention on the final goal, which is completion, and not get into these trivial arguments over the little, how are we going to serve the documents?
Speed kills deals.
There you go.
It's true.
Or
lack of speed.
Yeah. Speed doesn't kill it. Lack of
it's
speed.
A lack of speed.
Yeah. what are the common problems? Well, you just said one, speed.
Yeah.
Or lack of speed. Are there any other issues that happen in a business sales process that should be avoided if possible?
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing that drives me. There's a couple of things that drive me insane.
Okay.
if you want to know what drives me insane, one of the things is we are very fast at turning around contracts. So instructions come in, full instructions, draft up the contract, get it out. But and I'm like very rigorous in. Our team has got to meet their, we have internal targets, which I'm not going to talk about because I don't want to force my team into them. But I have really clear targets in terms of how long the team has to turn around a contract and get it out, right? They work so hard to get the contracts out and then radio silence from the other side. Do you know what? That kills me. And I would there's so many lawyers I would like to throttle because, and it's an ongoing, everlasting issue. How do we get both parties moving quickly? We'll move quickly, but then, and then you lose momentum. Sits with the other side for 2 weeks, 3 weeks until they can be bothered to, review it, turn around, get it back. And the problem is, that it could, the deal itself, if you keep that momentum up, can be so much easier than when it slows down. So that kills me, that speed of that slow speed of reply. And we try a lot of things to get in front of that. We try to talk to the other lawyers really early and we say, if there's any issues, let's get on the phone quickly and discuss them rather than, sit for ages until we get feedback from you. And then we hound them. I'm not ashamed to say we hound. We just hound and hound and hound.
So I'll tell you what really frustrates me.
Tell me, I want to hear. Tell me, Zoran.
Right?
Yeah.
So when we spend 6 months working on the deal and we do these beautiful heads of agreements and everything else, and he goes to the lawyer that's going to prepare the contract, seller's lawyer, and he just ignores it a whole lot. And he starts where we were 6 months ago. And then the other party goes, hey, that's not what was agreed. And we're going back and forward. And then 3 months later, we go back to where we were with original heads of agreement. And I'm not sure why they do it. And I've got a theory about it.
Really? I guess I don't see that side. Is that right? That's ridiculous.
It does happen. It does happen more often than not.
Right.
And the reason why I think it happens is two reasons. One, lawyer is not confident. He wants to have a paper trail that he advised his client differently, and now we agreed through the process to this. That's one reason. The other reason is they're just lazy, so they just send a standard contract without really giving it attention to what was agreed and what's in term sheet prior to that. It doesn't happen often, but when it happens, it's really super frustrating.
Maybe sometimes it's that lack of confidence as well. They've got their own template. They think that everything should run in the way that their own template runs and that they get too scared to think outside of it. And so, and they push everything back to, I don't know. That sounds ridiculous. If that happens, they should move lawyers, yeah. I think, immediately. Take their checklist and go and find
Just want to move the lawyers. Just move the lawyer. Look, anything else that you can contribute to this? And thanks for being so honest. I mean, we really had an open and honest conversation. But look, any profession, some people do it better, some people do it not so good. And what you and me think that's the right way, maybe it's not, but that's what we think. Somebody else think it's done differently, and that's how the
But I think it's about trying to keep. I don't profess to always have the perfect answer to everything, the perfect approach to everything. All I can say is I'm constantly out there watching what's happening in the market, and I constantly push for finding better ways, better ways, more efficient ways. The answer is, in reality, it's a constant evolution. I don't think that ever ends. It's just always about digging to how can you improve it? How can you change it? How can you do it differently? And in good news, perhaps as we've talked about from a legal perspective, it seems like there's a pretty low bar. So innovate.
I'm not saying that. Joanna does. Look, there's very few people that actually specialize in this. There's a big end of town, but SMEs don't actually. It's hard for SMEs to find somebody who does this and does it well. Often they go to the lawyer they've been using for wills and settlements for the houses and whatever, and maybe it's not the best person to. And that lawyer, it's the nature of the business. He'll say, yes, I can do it, and he can do it. It's just not efficient enough.
Yeah.
All right. We one thing that I always say to people: make sure that you do your due diligence on the business, on the seller, on everything when you're buying a business, because contract will document what you agreed. But if you miss the crucial issues at the beginning, contract's not going to save. It could to some extent. But whole litigation and all this, it's going to be very, very complex if you have to go that way. Sometimes having a good contract can just remind people what was agreed, and they can help. But this litigation part, you want to stay away from.
100% agree. 100% agree. But I see the contract as the opportunity to act as a checklist to help remind you of the things that you should be asking anyway about the business. And if you think about it that way, it's actually it's not a process to sit in the bottom of your drawer to work out whether you've got something that you can sue someone about in the future. It's actually a process that helps you make good decisions and ask questions along the way.
Yeah. See, with these, with the contracts and with the purchasing of the business and doing your due diligence, there is a point that you made a decision. That's normally when you execute that contract. So it's not what's going to happen afterwards. You got to make sure that your due diligence before that is done. That contract you could have as tight as you want, all right? It's still not going to give you 100% security that everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Phil Todd on this podcast, and he said one very good thing. He's a buyer's agent. And he said, I said to my clients when I talk to them, this is probably the most riskiest thing you will do in your life.
Yeah.
And it is. So accept that risk, have a good lawyer, have a good accountant to help you, have a good broker. But on the end, the decision sits with the purchaser of the business, and that business owner is taking all the risk.
And it is a risk, absolutely. And, the interesting thing, though, and I think this is a thing, I just touched on at some point the opportunity for businesses, for SMEs to grow through acquisitions, because I just think, that's an area that I just think is really exciting for businesses to find ways to buy other businesses to help them to grow rather than relying on organic growth. And one of the pushbacks quite often is, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm concerned about the risk in the transaction. But the funny thing is, quite often the first transaction that someone in that sort of situation does is not their best. But it's like putting a toe in the water, taking on the risk, and accepting.
Start small.
Yeah, start small. Start small, learn along the way. But I find when my clients get this, it's like this light bulb goes off in their head, and they really understand how to do it. It can create so much value for their business.
Look, I've seen people do this in the past, and we purchased a few businesses. It's not an easy process, but it's a very rewarding process. Yeah. First you got to find a business, then you got to negotiate a deal, and then sometimes people on the market, sometimes you approach them. So the process is long, it's complicated. You need good advisors around you. Yeah. And it's not cheap either. You have to have funds to do it. But the benefits that can come out of that and the speed of growth, it helps you grow business much faster than through your generic growth and advertising and getting people. So what you're actually buying when you're buying a business is, you can buy some special intellectual property and whatnot, but in essence, you're buying time. So purchasing business can bring your goal years closer than doing it through just normal generic growth.
Organic growth, absolutely, 100%.
And I'm a big believer in that. Yeah, I live out of selling and buying businesses. So
we're so biased, all right. Of course, we're biased.
Let's just put it out there, in the interest of full disclosure.
That's so true.
Okay, thank you very much again. Now, just before we finish this, tell us about your podcast. Did you go to the Deal Room? Tell us about your book. And tell us where people can find you.
Why not? Well, the Deal Room podcast, so I talk all about, buying and selling businesses from a whole heap of different angles. I think we've got about 200, I can't even remember where we're up to now, about 230, 250 episodes. And so there's a whole heap of detail we're getting there. So you can find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, I don't know where else, any of your favourite podcasts.
Just Google the Deal Room, you'll find it. Yeah.
And I've also got the book Buy, Grow, Exit, which you'll find at buygrowexit.com.au.
Okay, now if people need a lawyer, where do they find
yeah, okay.
Remember, that's what you do for a living.
That's right, good point. Okay, yeah. Aspect Legal. And we've got a booking engine on our site. So if you just want to talk to one of the lawyers, just jump onto our website, book yourself a time to speak to a lawyer, and we can talk to you about the transaction that you're looking at, or how you can organise yourself. We can go through the answer to the Choosing a Lawyer checklist with you.
There you go.
Talk to you. And if you want the Choosing a Lawyer checklist, actually, Lord knows where it is. I don't know. Somewhere on our website.
You can download it if you can find it.
Yeah, that's right. The resources page at Aspect Legal. I don't even know where that resources page is, but somewhere hopefully easy to find on our website at Aspect Legal, and you can download that and take it to your lawyers and interview them.
Hey, thank you very much for talking to me. I hope we didn't upset too many people, and I hope that a lot of people got some good information out of this. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Need help selling your business, buying a business, or a business valuation? Exclusive Business Sales award-winning team are here to help. Our experience, skill, expertise, and professionalism, backed by our triple guarantee, is assurance for your success. The largest network of buyers and our national coverage will help you throughout Australia in all state capitals and regional areas. Exclusive Business Sales. Sell your business with certainty.